Okay, so how do you apply like a rigid academic X-ray to a completely ethereal concept like nirvana? I mean, if you break your arm, the X-ray shows a jagged white line, right?
Right, exactly. There's no debate.
Yeah, the doctor points at it,
Uh,
and it's just a binary, visible fact. But when you step into ancient philosophy, spirituality, concepts like mindfulness or karma, you'd assume that kind of precision just goes out the window.
oh, absolutely. People usually imagine that studying ancient spiritual traditions involves, sitting quietly on a mountain somewhere.
Right, it's meditating.
Exactly. Meditating and just writing down whatever profound reflections happen to drift into your mind. They envision poetry, not data.
Well, today we're shattering that assumption entirely because studying the ethereal is actually subjected to some of the most meticulous, punishingly exact academic rigor you'll ever encounter.
It really is.
So we're plunging into a highly specific and honestly fascinating set of sources for this deep dive today. We're looking at the official subject guidelines for a course called Research Methodology in Buddhism.
Taught by Assistant Professor Dr. Khantong Wattanapradith, right?
Yes, exactly. At the International Buddhist Studies College, which is part of the Mahachulalongkorn Ravidyalaya University in Thailand. And alongside her syllabus, we're looking directly at their extraordinarily detailed official thesis handbook.
It's a remarkable document. I mean, our mission here is to explore exactly how 2,500-year-old spiritual wisdom intersects with, very modern academic methodology.
It's quite the contrast.
It is. We're looking at the mechanics of how scholars measure, map, and rigorously defend the intangible. And, this university is arguably one of the most important hubs for Theravada Buddhist scholarship in the world.
And here is why you, listening to this right now, should care about this, even if you aren't currently writing a PhD on Theravada Buddhism.
Which I'm guessing most people aren't.
Probably not. But we all deal with massive, unwieldy ideas in our lives, right? So understanding how these scholars take something as infinite as human consciousness and just force it into a structured, arguable framework, it's basically a masterclass in critical thinking.
Oh, for sure.
Whether you're prepping for a boardroom presentation or just trying to untangle a complex personal philosophy, there's immense value in seeing how the sacred gets organized. So, okay, let's unpack this.
The central tension here is just fascinating to me. You have infinite spiritual concepts being poured into very rigid, earthly academic containers.
Right.
So to understand how a student survives this process, we really have to start with how that container is built. And the absolute foundation of this methodology is the thesis proposal.
Yeah, and calling it a proposal almost feels like a joke once you read the handbook.
It's intense.
It's literally a 14-part architectural blueprint. A student can't just walk in and say, hey, I'm fascinated by the concept of suffering, let's explore that.
No, definitely not.
The handbook dictates 14 strict components that have to be present before the research is even authorized to begin. You have the background and significance, the objectives, the conceptual framework.
A tentative table of contents.
Yes, just to name a few of the hurdles, it's wildly comprehensive.
And that background and significance section is particularly demanding because of the intellectual hoops it forces the researcher to jump through.
Oh, the 3 criteria.
Exactly. The handbook mandates that a student must explicitly answer why their research is needed. And they can't just offer some vague justification. They have to satisfy 3 very specific criteria.
Okay, walk us through them.
First, they have to prove the existence of past or present troubles and articulate exactly what happens if those troubles remain unsolved.
Oh, okay. High stakes right off the bat.
Right. Second, they have to lay out the existing theoretical context. And third, and this is often the hardest part, they have to prove that this is a fresh subject.
Okay, that third requirement is where I have to pause. Proving you have a fresh subject when your primary source material is a canon of texts that scholars and monks have been analyzing, debating, and memorizing for 2.5 millennia.
Yeah, it's a tall order.
It sounds impossible. Finding a fresh angle on the Buddha's teachings isn't like, I don't know, finding a gap in a new scientific field like AI.
No, the texts have been pretty static for centuries.
Right. So how does a student actually accomplish that? What's fascinating here is how they navigate that.
Well, by executing an incredibly exhaustive literature review, which requires microscopic attention to detail. Because you're right, the core tenets of Buddhism have been debated endlessly.
So they can't just say, I'm researching karma.
Exactly. They have to find the white space between existing scholarly arguments. So, for example, they might look at how a specific sub-commentary from the 12th century interprets the mechanics of karma differently than a 5th century commentary,
Oh, wow.
and then show how that specific divergence impacts modern monastic discipline in a very particular region.
So they're basically hunting for an unexamined philosophical friction point.
Precisely. They'd point to all the heavy hitters who studied the topic,
Yeah.
explicitly show where those scholars stopped, and basically card out the tiny, highly specific blank space their research will fill.
That is so demanding.
It takes an abstract spiritual curiosity and forces it into an actionable, quantifiable academic gap.
Which totally recontextualizes another required part of the proposal, the statement of problems desired to know.
I love that phrasing.
Right. When I read that phrase in the handbook, I pictured like a detective's corkboard.
Oh, with the red string?
Yes. You know the trope, the detective has a wall full of photos, maps, and red string connecting everything. The handbook is telling the student they cannot start searching for clues in the ancient texts until they've pinned up the exact parameters of the mystery.
It forces hypothesis-driven research. Because if your statement of problems is too broad, your research will just become a sprawling, unreadable mess.
And if it's too narrow,
Then you won't have enough material to sustain a full thesis.
okay, but let's say you nail the proposal. You find that perfect, fresh academic gap, you map out your problems, then you actually have to build the physical document.
Right, the actual thesis.
And this transition from ethereal philosophy to a physical object brings this massive wave of meticulous formatting rules. This university requires sacred texts to be housed in very worldly ways.
The physical presentation is heavily policed. I mean, the final thesis must be bound in a black hardcover, and the lettering on the cover must be golden.
Black and gold. It's so specific. It completely strips away any individual design choices and imposes a very regal, authoritative uniformity.
It creates a serious egalitarian archive. Because on the shelf, a master's thesis looks visually identical in weight and importance to a doctoral dissertation.
That's a great point.
But the internal cover page is where we really see the unique intersection of a secular university and a religious institution. The naming conventions are deeply complex because the handbook has to account for monastic hierarchy.
Yeah, this was fascinating to me. If a layperson writes a thesis, they just use their normal name, right?
Yep, just standard format.
But if a monk is the researcher, the rules change completely. They can't simply write the name they were born with. They must use their given name alongside their Pali name, which is known as a chaya.
And doesn't stop at the chaya. The handbook outlines exactly how to handle courtesy titles like Fra or Framaha.
Oh.
Furthermore, if the monk has been granted a royal or ecclesiastical title by the Thai king or the Sangha, which is called a Samanasak, that formal title must be included.
Wow.
Yeah, their personal name and Pali name are then placed in brackets behind it.
It's a profound reminder that the student producing this academic work is also bound to a living, breathing religious hierarchy. The document has to respect both the academic registry and the monastic registry.
It's a dual citizenship, basically.
Exactly. But then we move from those lofty cultural traditions into the actual typing standards, and the handbook becomes almost obsessively granular.
Ooh, the formatting rules are intense.
It mandates A4 paper, it specifies laser printing, it demands margins of exactly 1.5 inches at the top and left and exactly 1 inch at the bottom and right.
Well, the 1.5 inches on the left anticipates the physical binding of that black hardcover, ensuring no text gets swallowed by the spine.
Right, I understand the binding logic.
Yeah.
But the rules go so much further. Students are locked into highly specific fonts.
No creative freedom there.
None. They can use Times New Roman Pali Garamond or TH Sarabun PSK. And if they use TH Sarabun PSK, it must be size 16. The others must be size 14.
Very specific.
And my personal favorite rule. Every paragraph must have a strict 8-space indentation. You start typing on the 9th letter, no exceptions.
It leaves zero room for aesthetic interpretation.
Which makes me want to push back on this entire system just a little bit. We're talking about a course on researching Buddhism, a religion fundamentally rooted in letting go of earthly attachments, recognizing impermanence, and escaping rigid cycles.
I see where you're going with this.
Doesn't it seem contradictory or at least overly bureaucratic to mandate exactly 8 spaces or specific font sizes when a student might be writing about the boundless nature of the universe? Doesn't all this red tape stifle the actual philosophical exploration?
I completely see the irony you're pointing out. It feels like trapping an ocean inside a thimble.
Yes.
But if we look at the history of how information survives lives, this hyper-standardization is the bedrock of global knowledge sharing.
Okay, how so?
Consider what Chulalongkorn University is actually doing. They are generating highly technical research on incredibly nuanced ancient texts. If they allow creative freedom with fonts, margins, or paragraph structures, they introduce visual noise.
Visual noise meaning the reader has to adapt to the writer's quirks before they can understand the philosophy.
Exactly. When you remove those variables, when the indentation and the typeface are identical across thousands of papers, the physical format becomes invisible.
Oh, that makes sense.
The reader's brain doesn't have to expend any energy adjusting to a new layout. A scholar in Bangkok, a researcher at Oxford, and a historian in Tokyo can seamlessly read, index, and archive each other's work without any physical friction.
So the bureaucracy actually protects the accessibility of the spiritual exploration.
Exactly. It's about preserving the signal through the noise.
Okay, that completely flips my perspective on it. You build a perfectly standardized container so the delicate contents can travel safely across the world.
Perfectly said.
But that concept of traveling across the world, and more importantly, traveling across time, brings us to the most intellectually demanding part of this methodology. How a student actually cites 2,500-year-old scriptures.
Right, the referencing system. This is really where the academic rigor of Assistant Professor Dr. KhantongWattanapradith's methodology reaches its absolute peak.
Because standard citations just don't cut it.
Not at all. For general citations, the college mandates the Turabian footnote style. But standard academic citation is entirely insufficient for the Pali Canon.
Because the Pali Canon, the Tipitaka, isn't just a book. It's a massive, sprawling collection of volumes, suttas, and monastic rules that were originally passed down through oral tradition.
Right, it's immense.
Navigating it requires an incredibly intricate GPS coordinate system. Here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of giving a latitude and longitude to find a physical location, the student is mapping exact coordinates within thousands of years of Buddhist thought.
That is the perfect analogy. And just like a real GPS needs a specific satellite network to function, a researcher has to declare which textual network they're using.
Right.
The handbook dictates that researchers must choose a primary edition of the Tipitaka and stick to it constantly. They cannot mix and match.
The sources highlight two major editions that dictate how these coordinates look. There's the PTS and the MCU.
Right. So the PTS stands for the Pali Text Society, based in the UK, which produces the Romanized Pali texts. If a student uses the PTS edition, the handbook requires a specific set of PTS abbreviations.
What does that look like?
A footnote might simply read S439.
Which looks like a typo to an outsider.
Yeah, total.
But to a Buddhist scholar, that code instantly means the Sayur Nikaya, Volume 4, page 39.
Exactly. However, if the student is using the Thai text edited by Chulalongkorn University itself, the MCU edition, the formula changes completely. It goes to volume, then item, then page.
Right, the handbook gives an example of this format, MCU parenthesis 14/20/100. Let's break that coordinate down because it really shows the sheer scale of the literature.
Okay, so MU stands for Majjhima Nikaya Uparipanasaka,
Which is?
a specific division of the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. MCU flags the edition. 14 is the volume, 20 is the item number, and 100 is the specific page.
It's so precise.
That single string of characters takes a reader anywhere in the world exactly to the precise sentence the student is referencing.
And it gets even more granular. They have completely distinct abbreviation systems for the commentaries, known as the Akakathas, and the sub-commentaries, the East.
Oh yeah, those are intense.
My jaw literally dropped when I saw the abbreviation DSAA.
Let me guess.
It stands for the Digalankaya Sumangala Vilasina Sila Kantavaga Atakakata. I would need a second keyboard just to type that out in full every time.
I think anyone would.
But let's get to the philosophical why behind all this. Why is it hypercritical to flag whether you're using the PTS edition or the MCU edition? If they're both translating the same ancient teachings, shouldn't the ideas be identical?
That assumption is exactly why the rigid citation rules exist. In ancient Pali, translation and interpretation are practically the same thing.
Really?
Yeah, the language is incredibly nuanced. And because it was originally oral, a single word can carry layers of meaning depending entirely on context. Over the centuries, different editorial boards might punctuate a sentence differently or group phrases differently.
Or choose a slightly different English or Thai equivalent for a complex Pali term.
Precisely. So if a student is writing a thesis on the mechanics of karma, a slight variance in how the PTS translates a verse versus how the MCU translates it, could change the entire foundation of their argument.
Wow. So if an examiner reads a student's thesis and thinks, wait, the Buddha never implied that about karma, they can just look at the footnote.
Exactly. By explicitly mapping the addition, the student is saying, I am drawing my conclusion from this exact translation. It anchors ethereal, abstract concepts to a verifiable, localized text.
It prevents theological drift.
Yes, and ensures the debate is grounded in textual reality, not just the student's personal interpretation.
It's essentially mathematical proof of work applied to spirituality. So, okay, put yourself in the shoes of a student. You've navigated the 14-part proposal.
You found your fresh subject.
Right. You formatted your margins perfectly. You mapped your GPS coordinates through thousands of pages of ancient text to support your argument. After all of that, you face the final crucible, the defense.
And the defense room at this university is unlike a standard secular academic defense. The structure of the committees ensures a uniquely intense intellectual trial.
How so?
There are two groups. You have the advisory committee, which guides the student's writing, and then you have the examination committee, appointed by the dean, featuring 3 to 5 members.
And the handbook specifically notes that the names of the examination committee are kept strictly confidential prior to the announcement.
They don't want anyone trying to game the system.
Right. You literally don't know who's going to be dissecting your years of work until the absolute last minute. Imagine the pressure.
It's terrifying. That confidentiality guarantees impartiality. But the most vital rule regarding the examination committee is its actual composition.
The mix of people.
Yes. The handbook mandates that it must include both Buddhist monks and laypersons. It also must include at least one regular instructor from MCU alongside external specialists.
Think about the tension in that room. You're a student defending a thesis on, say, the concept of anatta non-self.
Okay.
You're standing in front of a secular lay professor in a suit who might be evaluating your historical methodology and linguistic accuracy.
Right.
And sitting right next to them is a monk in saffron robes who has dedicated their entire life to actually practicing the liberation you're just writing about. How does a student even begin to satisfy both of those worldviews simultaneously?
It is the ultimate test of synthesis. Think about it. If this thesis were defended at a purely secular university in the West, it might become an entirely historical exercise, right? Completely divorced from the lived, practiced reality of Buddhism as a religion.
Yeah, just academic.
But if it were judged entirely within a monastery, it might lean so heavily on faith and tradition that it bypasses modern critical analysis.
So this committee structure prevents the defense from becoming an echo chamber.
Exactly. A student could present a brilliant linguistic argument about a text, but the monk on the panel might just ask, okay, but how does this interpretation actually aid a practitioner in overcoming suffering?
Wow, that's a tough question.
Conversely, a student might present a beautiful spiritual reflection, and the lay professor will demand to see the exact Pali coordinates and historical proof. To pass, the research must hold up to both the spiritual practitioner and the academic critic.
And the grading is unforgiving. When the presentation is over, the student is asked to leave the room while this diverse panel deliberates.
Right, they have to sweat it out in the hallway.
Yeah, and they're judged on a strict scale. Excellence, which is an A, good, a B+, passed, a B or failed, an F. There is also an IP symbol for in progress if the thesis requires further arrangement. And what constitutes a failure here isn't just about bad philosophy, right? It goes all the way back to the container.
Oh, yes. A thesis can contain brilliant insights, but if the methodology is flawed, it fails. And even if a student receives a passing grade, the ordeal is not over.
Not at all.
The dean of the graduate school will absolutely withhold their signature on the approval page if the format and text have not been perfectly revised based on the committee's feedback.
Meaning if your 8-space indentation is sloppy, or you forgot to bracket a monk's Samanasak title, or you use the wrong abbreviation for a sub-commentary, you do not graduate.
Period.
The standard of absolute perfection is maintained right down to the final keystroke.
Because for these scholars, the academic rigor is not separate from the spiritual practice.
Right.
The discipline of formatting, referencing, and defending the work is itself an exercise in mindfulness and respect for the tradition.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. So let's bring this back to you, the listener. We've just explored the rigorous machinery of researching Buddhism at IBSC.
It's quite a journey.
From finding a microscopic gap in a 2,500-year-old tradition, to building a perfectly standardized black and gold container, to mapping ancient coordinates, and finally surviving a defense room that balances secular science with deep faith.
The core lesson here is really about managing complexity. If these scholars can take ideas as massive and elusive as the nature of human suffering or the mechanics of consciousness and successfully apply a rigorous, systematic structure to them.
Then we can apply that same discipline to our own lives.
Exactly. Passion and curiosity are essential starting points. But structure, the willingness to define your terms, map your sources, and anticipate the counterarguments from different perspectives is what makes those ideas transmittable to the rest of the world.
Absolutely. And that idea of transmission leads to a fascinating historical paradox. The scholars in Dr. Khantong course are utilizing highly structured modern academic tools to archive and analyze concepts that were originally passed down purely through oral tradition.
Right. Monks chanting to other monks, preserving massive volumes of text entirely through human memory.
For centuries, before a single word was ever written down, let alone formatted with a 1.5-inch margin.
Exactly. And if an ancient oral tradition, which survived millennia on the strength of human memory, eventually required this level of hyper-precise, standardized, black and gold bound mapping just to be fully understood and protected from distortion today.
Where does that leave us?
Well, it forces us to ask, how will future scholars systematically map and make sense of the chaotic, fragmented, endlessly shifting digital information we are generating right now?
That's a staggering thought.
If it requires a GPS coordinate like MCU 14/20/100 just to verify a single ancient truth about mindfulness, what kind of academic X-ray machine will the future need to diagnose the reality of our current era?